We're live.
Good.
Yes, we're live.
Oh, we live?
Yes.
Hallelujah. You gotta get it. Look, you know,
Get a sign that
say,
says
live.
Yeah, we got live right now.
And we pray.
Yeah, the flashing light or something.
Yeah.
Well, you are live, so you can say
How
what
y'all doing? Hey, listen, I know I didn't step on no toes last week, even though I said some of y'all was scared to call, but that call last week was amazing.
Oh, for my mom.
Yeah. Look, she set it up. She brought the old school flavors, like, yeah. But, you know, and reminding us, because elections are important. I mean, a lot of stuff y'all do, and some of your program money is affected by election. In fact, this is why even younger folks need to know, you got a basketball team, you got somewhere where you play, that center you play at is affected through the electoral system, because the money to keep it open, since you ain't making it to keep it open, come from somewhere. And I'm just saying, we need to understand it. So if you check out participating in the civic engagement of voting, then you really checked out a life. And yes, you dead, just not buried yet. And now, if you want to get real and get serious, you need to stop playing that game and really get involved, because we need to make some change. And you know it. You ain't living well. You're living okay. Got a little more than maybe somebody else. But the truth is, that's the zone we in.
Right.
That's why I love the flavor of this rising generation. And you ought to too, because they bring the juice. I mean, the world they make it is the world where everybody can get in. Yeah, those in the alphabet community too. You know what I'm talking about. I don't want to scare nobody. But I'm just saying that's where we at. And you know, and like we said last week about immigrants. Hey, look, this is a big old world. You ain't even holding up your share if you ain't voting. Because even what we have to do in the electoral process affects the rest of the world. Policies we make here, we be thinking we just doing it for us. It has effect around the world, because you're voting on a local, a state, international level. And you know, if you sleep, and if you're silent, I'm tell you, like Dr. King said, that's part of the problem. That's complicity. And in fact, that's kind of traitorous in these moments where you see a struggle that's going on like it is now. Back when we talk about one of those issues. Okay, going in.
Mix 1080 WUFO and Power 96.5. Locally, nationally, it's Conversation with Jim Anderson. And now, your host, Jim Anderson.
Good morning, Buffalo. It is Conversation with Jim Anderson. I'm joined by Jim, but it's not Jim, it is Austin Martin. We have a great interview today with another guest that's been one of those people that's been consistently in our corner, somebody that we've been repping heavy because they've been repping hard and doing good work in Buffalo for the people of Buffalo. We have H.O.M.E again, Housing Opportunities Made Equal, with a bunch of interesting things to talk about, maybe some curveballs as well. Like I said, I am joined by Jim here in the station. So how are you doing today, Jim?
Hey, I feel great, and I'm glad to be here on another necessary subject. You know, like I said, it's like medicine over there, and then we take it, we're going to get well. And we're going to get well. I'm just saying we're going to get well, but this is really good stuff, and H.O.M.E got a lot today to bring us.
No, I haven't been on the station for too long, but this is my third H.O.M.E interview. And the last interview I had with H.O.M E, we have a returning familiar face from them, but we also have a new guest today. So I want the guest from H.O.M E, how are you guys doing today, to introduce yourselves to listeners and just tell us how you're doing today.
Yeah, I'm good. I want to thank you guys for having us on again. I'm Stephen Hodgson. I'm the education manager at H.O.M E. So I've been on the show before, and I'm happy to be back again.
And I'm Sierra Fields. I work alongside with Stephen in the education department. My title is content and education specialist. And I'm looking forward to seeing what curveballs you throw me today.
All right. So I know I was tasked with a couple of things we need to touch on before we can get to the curveballs. But I think you guys got a big event coming up, something very exciting. We touched on it the last interview, but a refresher, because sometimes people forget. we have the 60th annual gala for
Yes,
coming
60
up
years.
soon. Can you guys give us some more information on that and how we can get involved?
Yes, so we are celebrating 6 years of fighting for fair housing. That's a big, huge milestone for us. And it is October 27th. It is at the H.O.M.E at Rich. It's from 5:30 to 9:30. Basically, what you will find is going to be a lovely event. We're going to have cocktails. We're going to have dinner. We're going to have dancing, baskets, silent auctions, everything that you want and more. Tickets are $100. And if you would like to purchase a ticket or inquire about sponsorships opportunities, you can call our office and we can assist you from there.
Okay, for sure. So this is a little just, I know we're talking about 60 years. 60 years is a long time. I'm only 19. I'm only 30. So 60 years in my mind is just a lot of time. Can y'all tell me what you think the value is over these 60 years? How has H.O.M.E helped Buffalo over these 60 years so that this gala is a commemoration of what?
Yeah, we started fighting for fair housing before there were actually legal protections. When we started in 1963, the Fair Housing Act hadn't been passed yet. It was completely legal for landlords to discriminate against people based on their race, based on their sex, based on their disability, any number of other reasons. So we've been around the block a few times. We've seen the changes that have happened. We've seen the improvements in protections available for people. But we also see how much farther there is to go. So 6 years is a celebration of how far we've come, but also a recognition that we're not there yet. I don't think there's ever really going to be a win for sure. We're never going to end housing discrimination, but we do want to continue fighting it and reduce it and make sure that people who experience housing discrimination have somewhere to go and someone to turn to help them.
Definitely, because housing, like we talked about in the last interview, is so important. I have a friend actually of mine who, is a renter, and the person that's owning their house is getting ready to move, and seeing the stress that puts them in is really difficult. Right? How can I progress in life? Right? How can I work if I have nowhere to rest? Right? So it becomes a very difficult dynamic, and I think homelessness and housing itself is one of those defining things that we use as people. Right? I got a house, you got a house, and when someone doesn't, sometimes, unfortunately, in society, we put them in almost a different group. So not having a house is like sometimes not having a name. It feels like, am I even human? People can dehumanize you in the lack of it. And definitely it's something that we need to stay on top of as the people in the city, but also the people helping the city. Keep moving in my things, in my itinerary. Speaking of discrimination, last time we had talked about application fee limits. Talk more about application fee limits so we can look out for that, and people that are in the housing system can look out for that.
Yeah, it's a really important thing for people to be aware of as they apply for places to rent, because not every landlord is going to know what kind of rules there are around applications. And so it's an area where you kind of have to stand up for yourself, because your rights aren't just going to be given to you. They exist under the law, but sometimes you have to know them yourself so that you can stand up for yourself. And so it's really important that everyone who is applying for a new place to live knows that they can never be charged more than $20 for an application fee. And that fee can only go toward running a background check or a credit check. And if a landlord runs those checks, they are required by law to provide a copy of those reports to you. And then once you have those copies, you can use them at other places that you apply, and then the landlord can't charge you a fee for that. So as long as you have a copy of the reports that's less than a month old, the landlord is legally required to accept those and then not charge an application fee. So, if you're not aware of this, you might pay a fee more than $20, or you might pay $20 over and over and over again. When, if you're doing it right, and you're making sure that the landlord is respecting your rights and following through on this, you shouldn't have to pay more than one application fee in a 1 month period of applying for housing.
You said it's for a background and what?
Background check or credit check.
Okay.
So those are things that landlords can do. They can use information like your credit score, stuff that they sign in a background check. They are allowed to consider that. But if you're applying to places to live, the cost of those application fees could really rack up. So it's important to know that there are limits, and then also that you have tools available to you to save yourself money when you're applying. And really, it should be a win-win if you have those copies, because that saves the landlord a bunch of hassle of having to go find a third-party source that does those reports and then get them run, and it's faster, it saves money, so it should be a win-win. And I think most landlords will see it that way. Sometimes they might put up a fuss about, oh, it's not the company that I usually use, but they are required by law to accept those.
And this is the boring stuff. This is the stuff when you're sitting in the roller coaster and they got to double check the handlebar. This is the stuff before the fun, but it's necessary because, like you said, if you are looking for a house or you're looking for these things, ultimately it becomes very hard at a certain point to blame a landlord for getting over on you when the information is out there. And so this information is really to help you. But something you touched on that I want to kind of expound upon is the idea of a win-win, right? A landlord and a tenant are on the same team. Can you talk more about that dynamic in your mind and how some landlords may get that wrong and may think it's a me versus you, and really it's a enough for all type of mentality?
I think really both sides, both tenants and landlords, often think of that relationship as adversarial, and it can be. I think there's definitely a bit of a power dynamic. There are a lot of things that kind of pit landlords and tenants against each other, and sometimes for good reason. But I think that it's important to remember that if things are going well, then it can be a win-win situation. Like if somebody has their own credit report and background report that they can provide to the landlord. There is that $20 limit. A lot of times it costs more than that to run those checks. And if it does, the landlord has to pay however much more than $20 it is. And so it might save the landlord money, and it might also save the applicant money. And so it's just an example of something where, following the law can actually help both sides. And I think the same thing goes for a lot of other areas. If you are renting a place and you make sure that you are taking good care of the place where you live, you're cleaning up, you're making sure that if there are repairs, you're letting the landlord know that they're needed as soon as possible. And then you have a nicer place to live. The landlord knows that you are being respectful of the property. They're going to be happy that their property is remaining in good condition. And you also have a good place to live. Then that relationship can stay good. And so I think that the landlord-tenant relationship doesn't have to be as adversarial as it sometimes ends up being.
And I think that sometimes, like you said a while ago, some landlords just may not know, may not be aware, and they may not be on top of things to the level they need to be. And that's understandable, right? Just as we're busy with life, trying to figure out hard things, landlords aren't exempt from that. Landlords have to live and do regular live things as well. But trainings, right? What if I'm a landlord who wants to get a little better? I want to get in the landlord technology and get my landlord master, if you will. You guys have landlord trainings, actually. Can you talk a little bit more on the landlord trainings and how they can get information to become the best landlord they can be?
Yeah, I mean, we want there to be as little housing discrimination, as few rights violations as there can be. And so, one part of that is helping tenants when their rights are violated, but a really big part of it is making sure that landlords who are trying to do things the right way have the information they need to do that. And so we offer landlord trainings monthly via Zoom, and we also have an on-demand webinar that people can register for and watch whenever they have the time for it. We offer a certificate of completion. We also send landlords who complete the landlord training, whether they do the live webinar monthly or whether they do the on-demand one. We send them other resources like a sample rental application that they can use that complies with New York State law, some of our informational brochures and stuff like that. So if you are a landlord out there and you want to know what you can and can't do when you're screening tenants, some things to remember to make sure that you are in compliance with state law, we have that information available, and we want to make sure that that information gets to the people who need it, those landlords who are trying to be good at their job and trying to do right by their tenants.
And also keep an eye out. We also have tenant rights workshops coming up as well, because we do want to make sure everyone is educational on their rights. So stay tuned on our Facebook and also on our website for upcoming tenant right workshops.
glad you raised that. And, you know, all through the conversation so far, I'm hearing what is actually same team talk. I think one of the deficits that exists in the present reality of how we look at issues that involve the tenant and the landlord had mostly been presented, you know, adversarially. And that there needs to be more reaching out to educate them both about each side. I mean, you know, knowledge is power. And I think also to talk about some of the what I think might be little parts that are not so legally specified. But for instance, I think about you when you mentioned people want a clean apartment. That says something about the way you should approach if you're trying to get a clean. If you're trying to approach. Now, I don't want to make it, you know, take it off space, but I mean, I think some of the discrimination is based on how you look, how you sound, and I think people need to remember that. I don't think, you know, I don't think all the time it's used in a negative judgment. I think sometimes it's used when you see you know, someone coming and the way they come, and if you got to clean the property, it might make you hesitant whether they got the money or not. So I mean, I just think that's the value of home. Everything that you do is so important, and even as it seems boring, people who are listening know it's important. Oh, by the way, people, you can join the conversation at 716-837-1112. People know that this is important. This is one of those don't want to say nothing subject, but want to hear all the information they can, because some of them are in those kind of situations right now and don't know where to come. And here's what I'm going to ask you. With the kinds of issues you already deal with, and when I think of both of your presence and you being bringing a different flavor, I mean, you coming in a zone where right now we have many young people who are facing housing situation. And I'm wondering, how do y'all adjust to speaking to that? Someone like Austin, who is going to seek an apartment, you know, do you have some kind of focusing at it? Because we know, you know, young folks don't know the law either. And, you know, so anyway, I'm wondering, do you do anything? Have you taken notice of that? And then I want to ask you, what have been the most challenging problem situation you're handling that you might haven't solved? What is that brings difficulty for your office that you maybe you're not able to handle that comes before you? That's a lot, right?
Well, I think that, yeah, it's important to recognize that, you know, different age cohorts are going to have different experiences with housing, different amounts of experience, different types of experience. And I think it's important for people who are starting to become renters for the first time. They're looking for their own housing. They're going to be the ones paying the rent. They're going to be the ones with their name on the lease. It's really important for them to know their rights so that they don't, so that them being mistreated doesn't get normalized. They don't get used to having landlords walk all over them and have their rights violated. I think if you go into it thinking, yeah, I deserve to be treated like a real human being with value. I think sometimes if you spend years dealing with landlords who aren't doing their job well, which there definitely are too many of. There are lots of landlords who are great, who want to provide a great place for their tenants to live, who want to be responsive, and who want to keep a good relationship with their tenants. But not everyone is that way. And if you have bad experiences with landlords over the years, you might start to think that that's normal. And sometimes it is normal, but it shouldn't be. And so I think it's important to make sure that young people get that information and they don't just let that happen to them. They don't start to think that being mistreated is normal, because it shouldn't be.
And here comes the curveball to that. It's not really a curve, but here's the other thing. See, an organization like H.O.M.E actually needs to have a program like this that deals with nothing but housing, a regular program that comes on that where people could interact to keep the growing going forward. And the curveball, not a slam on y'all, but recommendation. Next time writing some of them grants, and even if you're not writing a grant, when you're talking to a funder, say, look, we can reach more people through the media on air with a program than we can knocking on doors and waiting for phone calls to come in. You're going to get that. But the value of the information, I mean, when a constant stream for a while, just 3 months, if some funder would fund you for 3 months to have a regular show on air, I mean, you bring in medicine. And it's useful to us, and it's needed in this moment. And so I'm arguing on your behalf to those and sit up in the upper chairs or in the office there. And if you need some help talking to the funders, I'm willing to come too. I mean, we're in a reality where we have an instrument that can reach many of the people who are in the zone that this station plays to. And you mean the funder don't have a sense enough thinking to say, hey, I should get home a little more money so they can be there and they wouldn't have to walk so much. When they wouldn't have to just sit by a phone too much. They could really be juicing. It's like dropping seeds. Okay, that's the
No, but that's a great idea because I'm 34. A woman should never tell her age, but I'm 34.
I'm 51. I'm grateful for it.
And so, but prior to working at home, I was a stay-at-home parent. Then when I decided to come back, I wanted to work for something that was doing something in the community, not a typical 9 to 5. So working from home really opened my eyes as to how, strongly or, how apparent housing discrimination is. It's something that you hear people talk about, but until you actually work for a company like H.O.M.E, you're like, wow, this really exists. People are really being discriminated based off their race, based off their familiar status, based off how they identify. And so it's one of those things in which I definitely agree with that. The more information that we put out there on media, the more people can learn. Because like Stephen said, people just think that it's normal, that it's okay, and it's not.
And that's the thing. I mean, the constant flow filters the air. And then lo and behold, you hear everybody in the community talking the legality for both sides, being able to imagine some arguments that could be squashed when people know their rights and know the course of action. And we're not talking about listeners, they're not dismissing the fact that there's discrimination is going to happen, but trying to catch the ills of it. Let's do that, but also let's catch where we can change it and make it healthy. Make it, I think you mentioned win-win, a win-win, because a lot of it can be that, and then, if we the city of good neighbors, it includes renters and the tenants and the owner and the landlord. Well, listen, H.O.M.E really is an awesome unit. And I just think people underestimate and unknowingly don't tag base. It's like home base, y'all. Tag in. I'm just saying, really. I mean, they don't even raise the questions to you that many of them just spend endless nights trying to come up with a scheme on how to get around it. And then with those landlords that are quite vicious, they slap them around, suck more money. You don't have to go to court. We're going to add this on, just keep them where they can't afford it. And then all of that contributes to other stuff. Because when people can't survive in the right, healthy way, they're not going to, they're going to do something. And then there you see another door that can lead some to criminal acts. And then you see it also leads some to just giving up on life. And so listeners, I mean, this is a serious organization, serious talk. And you can join us, 716-837-1112. I'm not begging. I know when people hear types of programs coming on, they may not rush the call because the information and what's being shared is like they resonate with it. And I think, if y'all were in studio, you would feel something I mentioned earlier. You feel the heat in here. You feel it kind of getting warm here, but good conversation. Look, it's like being on the porch, land of lemonade, but you know, it's really cool.
I got a curveball just for the record.
Yeah.
When he checks the radio play, I talked about the gala, I talked about the application fees, the background report, and we talked about landlord training. But this is the sidebar. I've been listening. Right? I've been listening, just listening a lot. I've been in a lot of interviews where I haven't said anything, just listening to people in Buffalo talking about it. And we're talking about advancement. We're talking about success. This is a community-based show. And we recognize renting is not the path to success, right? Ultimately, if you want success in your community, you want wealth, generational wealth, you need to own something. So as a company or an organization based around housing discrimination, right? Because housing is a broad term. The same Section 8 that can be applied to renting can be applied to owning, correct? You can put Section 8 on a mortgage. When you're a company based around helping people that are struggling with renting, how do you balance renters and buyers? If buyers is where we're ultimately trying to get our people to, right? How do we balance that? Because landlords, we don't want to cut them out. Landlords play a role in the ecosystem for people like me who are young, trying to get an apartment. I may not be able to go straight into a mortgage. So I understand the value of landlords, and I don't want to make them feel like we're ostracizing them. Oh, give me your money back. Nope, all gone. What I am saying is if we're really focused on the people side, the people we're called to serve, you guys are called to serve, should not be, at least in my eyes, when talking about wealth and success. Renting just isn't an avenue for that. So how do you balance that? And this isn't on the record. It doesn't have to be a perfect answer. You cannot know. But just how do you balance that in your mind between getting people either staying on renting or trying to transition people to being owners?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And, you know, honestly, I think that home ownership is really valuable. And you're absolutely right that it is kind of the number one way that people build wealth in the US. It shouldn't have to be that way. People should be able to rent if that's what they prefer to do. But unfortunately, that is the way it is. And it's almost impossible to build wealth if you're renting, because if you're paying a mortgage, that part of that mortgage payment is building wealth, whereas that's not the case with rent. And also, you know, housing prices have been increasing for decades and decades. It's not sustainable. I don't think it can go on forever, because eventually people aren't going to be able to buy houses anymore. But if that is the case, you get a 30-year mortgage, you lock that rate in, and suddenly, you know, 25 years down the road, you're paying like 10 to 15% of what you'd be paying if you were renting. So yeah, it's really important. And we do help people who experience discrimination when they're looking to buy. It just doesn't happen quite as often as people getting discriminated against when they're renting.
I want to reply to that, but now it sounds like people just woke up at 10:30. So we do have a caller. Caller, we're on the air. Good morning.
Yeah, good day. My question is about the property speculation that's going on in the city. Some people call it flipping. That seems to be detrimental to the livelihood or the well-being of citizens of the city. Is there anything that H.O.M.E does to discourage the property speculation and people coming in and raising the tax rate, raising the rental rate, just basically wreaking havoc with the relationship between landlords and tenants?
So you're talking about flipping. Can you talk more about the dangers of flipping and how that in fact impacts the residents, so you can reply a little better to your question?
Well, you know, property that sold for 20 or 30,000. Are you talking to me, or are you talking?
I'm talking to you. Yes, sir.
Okay, the property that sold for 20 or 30,000 now going for 150,000, 100,000, and rents that used to be $500 now being $1,000 and $1,500. And there's no telling that it will stop, because prices and rents go up, not down most times.
Yeah, I tell you what, the answer to all of that is really, again, right back to the electoral process. Is looking at what are the regulations, the laws, and that are made that speaks to the issue, because the same way that you can see it in other see it and feel it, they know about it. I mean, it's all around the country that flipping and it's about making money. And if there's no restriction around somebody buying a $20,000 house, do what they want to do with it and raise the price, that's on them. You know, I don't know nobody that want a $300,000 house that costs 20 in an area where most might not even be at 20,000 anyway. But that's my point about that. But I do want to raise a question to you, home, and is around, you know, there are a lot of landlords or landowners who have housing and stuff who utilize a property management company. Have you anything around that, or any, how, you know, who's held accountable when there are violations, you know, because if you got a property management, is the landlord shield by saying, I didn't do anything?
Yeah, well, I want to go back to what the caller was saying, and then
Okay.
go back to that, because it is an issue. And I wish that we could do more about, you know, people, like out of town people just scooping up cheap properties and turning a profit on them. But most of what we do is making sure that laws that exist are enforced, and there aren't any laws that prevent that. So like Jim was saying, it is about the electoral system. It is about local elections and making sure that local elected officials are aware that this is an issue and are thinking about it and trying to craft policies that address it. Because we at home can't address it because there is no legal recourse against that, because it's 100% legal. And so it's definitely an issue, and it definitely can be detrimental to communities. I think there is a time and a place for someone coming in, buying a cheap property, fixing it up, making it a higher quality place to live, and then making a profit that way. But that's not always what's happening. Sometimes it's not actually getting fixed up. But yeah.
Before we touch on the next point, we got a quick commercial break. We'll be back right into it.
So if you are out of town and you buy a property in New York, you don't need a local property manager. So that's a false statement.
I mean, it's, even if that was the law, I don't know if it would be enforced or how it would be enforced.
And then how do you know the difference between a good and a bad property manager? If you're a owner, you want to use one.
Yeah, it's tough. I think you probably have to talk to like tenants and hear their experiences, but I don't think anybody goes through that process to find that out.
How you feel? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying, based off their work, I used to do residential law. So I was just thinking about like the property managers that we came across, and just based off their work, we were able to, you know, refer them to other people. That was a good question. You curveballing us today.
No, because I just didn't know that was the case. I thought that if you were out of state and you were an owner, that you needed a local property manager. But that's not true.
Thanks. I could be wrong. But
I
don't
thought that was
think
true,
so.
but
What's
it could not be true.
Samuel Lamont and creator
If
of
it's
the
true,
HBCU
I don't
Culture
think
Shop.
it's enforced.
I am so proud of
I know there wouldn't be no way to enforce
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
They helped me.
I just feel like
elevate
that's a
pride
good thing to
like
have a
HBCU
property
That
manager.
reminds me of there's an older woman that I know. She lives in like a senior complex, and the elevator broke down for weeks, and they tried to reach the landlords, but the landlords were the, you know, third property managers. They were in Florida, so they Channel 7 went to contact the landlords and the property managers that lived here, and it wasn't until the news showed up that stuff was important. So it's one of those things. Yeah. So unless the media gets involved.
Yeah, because like local managers become the villains. A lot of times you can have a good landlord, think they got a good company, and the good company, it might be a good company, but you have some staff that, you know how people can get with others and get out of.
I do want to answer that question that you
Okay.
Well, go right back to the show. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about renting versus buying, increasing property prices, increasing rent prices. And then we were also touching on a little bit of law and property out-of-town management. It sounds like a lot, but I got someone who's an expert that's going to help make it make sense. If you continue what we were talking about.
Yeah. Jim, you had asked, if an owner is responsible if they have a property management company and property manager discriminates against somebody. I mean, the person who does the discrimination is the primary person responsible, but unless the landlord can prove that the property manager was explicitly doing something the landlord had told them not to do, they are also responsible. So if the property manager is not doing anything other than what they've been instructed to do, then the owner can be held responsible as well if they discriminate.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you answered that, and I hope listeners really take it to heart, because there are a lot of tricks that are going on around housing that really need folks like you at home to help people understand what their rights are. And that's the biggest thing on both sides of the line. They need to understand their rights. Maybe some landlords would cease and not even begin some of the illegal things that come your way. And what's mentioned earlier, if people really take this to heart, it makes them able to stand up for themselves. And I really think the younger generation needs to get it more. My confession would be, I can recall when I was a little young, it wasn't that long ago, and not too far from him. And, but we used to hear stuff, you get it in there, but then pay no attention to it. And then when you get in a situation where you have to deal with something like that, you find yourself got a call. What'd you say about that? Or trying to remember, or you go in thinking blindly, and then you done sign something that, no, that's not why I was signing it, and you can't. Yeah. So, us young folks got to know that.
Okay. And I think that's important, right? You're talking about, and when we look at the system, right? Because I'm going to go back to even what the caller said. We look at the system, back in the day, not that I can attest to that. My knowledge, people were buying homes, there was opportunity. So even on the seller side, right, you talk about the increase of rent prices and everything's going up. Even on the seller side, there was more opportunities to sell. There were more people looking for it. If I'm a homeowner and the only person that's approached me about my property is an out-of-town person offering me like double the value, I mean, you're not giving me a lot, or triple you're not giving me a lot of options. And so when you're focused on renting and not buying, you're not walking up to these rooms to really put a number out there and maybe pitch it differently. Hey, this man may want to buy it to rent. I'm buying it to go start a family. And when you think about community, right, the more that we can keep the wealth in homeowners' hands, it's not about us or them. The more you keep the wealth in homeowners' hands and build a community of people that live together and know each other, a real close community, then the value goes up on its own, right? So value going up isn't necessarily bad if it's in the right sense, but we have to be up at the table, right? You got to be putting numbers in there. I can't complain that, they're taking all the houses, but I've never even put in a number on one. Well, how are they going to sell it to me? Like, they're not going to get it to me in a Christmas gift. I'm not going to get lucky in the house lottery, at least. I didn't see that recently at gas stations for scratch off. So I think that being up to the table, being there, even putting up a number, and that's why I think it's so important to understand that dynamic of renting versus buying. There's sometimes in your life when you need to rent, and there's sometimes when you need to buy. When you go to either extreme, you see what happens. When you go to an extreme buying sense, people that can't afford homes are on the streets. When you go to an extreme renting side, for the growth and, like I said, the development that we want in the communities, of course, it's going to be usurped from out of town people because we're not even putting our hat in the ring.
Well, got a call.
I think we got a call that might be able to expound on that. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning.
Hey, Dr. Dahl.
Yes, how are you today?
All righty.
I have a question, but I don't know whether or not it fits in with your discussion. About a week ago, there was a huge foreclosure auction of Erie County properties. And announce it until the last minute. And there were hundreds of people there buying property. So I don't think it was fair that it was not announced so people could prepare themselves if they wanted to buy property. And I just wanted to know from your guests if this is something they do to kind of let people know when property is being auctioned off. That's my question. Okay, Mr. Anderson, I don't know if you knew about. Did you know about the auction?
I do, but I want to hear. What they say, just like you to see.
Yes. I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
Thank you.
For your program.
Thank you, Dr. Doyle.
I would say that's another example of something that, you know, is a local elections issue. You know, it's a matter of transparency and making sure that the elected officials are serving the people who they should be serving, which it sounds like in this instance is not necessarily the case. So yeah, I think there's so many examples where local elections matter so much, and there are things that, like Austin was saying earlier, they seem boring, and then suddenly it affects you, and it's not boring anymore, but now it's too late. And so you need to be paying attention to these things while they still seem boring, so that they don't catch you by surprise later. And, you know, local elections matter. Your voice matters even more in a local election than in a national election, because first of all, we all know Congress does nothing, but local governments do things on occasion. And, you know, there are fewer people who vote in those elections. And so when you do actually participate and vote, your voice is multiplied compared to those national elections. And you can make sure that you're voting for people who are going to be working in your interest instead of interest of, you know, rich people.
Well, can I just say, I know, and I never have a mic. Can I use your mic or somebody's mic? So, wait, I would say, okay, so I don't compare it to the local election because that thing she's talking about, that auction, is when I used to sell real estate, it is every single year this time. It's never announced. You just know it's coming. And other groups and cultures, they prepare for it. So they pull their cash together, they can go in, or they know the terms of how you can get those. But I guess that is the difference. In a local election, they do at least talk about it. This is something that even like the bike auctions, they have bike auctions, house auctions, there's all kinds of auctions that happen, or even people knowing before the auction happens, you can pull records to see that somebody's backing their taxes and make an offer to them. These are things that are happening all the time in other cultures. I didn't even know that buying a house when I first graduated from college was an option, right? Until I was at work and everybody else was buying a house. So I said, I want to buy a house. Now, I didn't know that the preparation before that, right? I happen to have a good job, but I know to find out that, okay, that interest rate is horrible. My interest rate was horrible, but I was so happy to buy a house. Nor the real estate agent that worked with me that's not supposed to allegedly do redlining, but she actually showed me only houses in certain neighborhoods because I didn't even know that I should have been looking at other things. So I'm just saying these things are happening all the time. We're just not talking about them in certain communities. So that's my little sidebar. He put me right on the Facebook Live. That's funny.
That's right.
I didn't know we had bike auctions. I'm like, there's all kinds of auctions that happen.
This is right on.
Before we jump into that, we have a caller. If you want to join the conversation, you're on the air, caller. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're on.
This is Julie.
Hey, I love you too.
I'm not sure if this is the platform for this, but I'm going to put it out there because sometimes there's stuff that connects that the people need to know. Now, my mother had a house built 1311 Michigan, built from the ground. My mother passed away in 2014. Her house went into probate. And because of a little family feud, we had a court-appointed administrator, H.O.M.E, who's now the judge over probate court. She sold my mother's house that had no debt. My mother had paid the mortgage off early. There was no debt on the house. They sold the house for $58,500 in a gentrification area. 58,500 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 in a gen Man purchased the house, and a year later, he sold it for about $97,000, if I remember correct. Now, my question is, being a court-appointed administrator, an executor or whatever over an estate, you can improve the property if it needs improvement, which her house needed no improvement according to some paperwork I have. And she could have sold that house for us and improved our estate for whatever, $97,000 or whatever. And I just wanted to know, was that legally correct, politically correct, or whatever? Because I know I've read about and the executive can improve an estate. You know, if it needs to be improvements done. And we lost money on that house. And my brother did offer to buy it, which they denied, and they put a price on him. And what he told them what he wanted it for, and they said no. And so they took over, which there's some corruption going on in that probate court. They stealing people's estate.
Thanks, Eula, for that question. I'm gonna let them go at it. I got a thought on it.
Thank you.
I can't speak to that. I'm not familiar with that process. I mean, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's definitely an issue, but that's not necessarily something we deal with at home. I think there are other organizations that might be available to represent people in those situations, but that's not something that we do.
Yeah, I would also add that one of the pieces in there that you need to look back on is when someone passes and there's not a will that directs where ownership over any property they have. When you have a court-appointed attorney, the only thing they can do, they can't even decide to sell it to either one of you. They have to put it up. Now, it might be that they didn't tell you so that you could have weighed in, but again, then you would have been in a competitive situation. But that's something worth, going further down, looking about. And I want to go back to the question that came in that Dr. Dahl raised. My thought about things that we're hearing that's coming from listeners is a call to stay home. Good what you're doing so far on the issue, but there's some you need to add, because the new games that are affecting people is generally not the way organizations, they have to make a turn. They have to make some kind of leveraging in order to bring in the new issues that are rising. And so when I hear what we're hearing from people on the line, it says that there's some issues that are rising that need to be figured out how to respond to. On the issue about the auctions, again, that's another saying to H.O.M.E, since you're doing landlords and tenant rights, one of the things when it comes to housing, that maybe y'all take the lead, be the point of the spear for the people, based on people asking you questions, to say to the city, hey, let us know when you're doing these home auctions so that we can put it out and let people know. It's part of the education. It's part of the housing opportunities made equal. I'm just saying. Yeah, the bosses. I know that putting it on your shoulders is not your job to lift, but it does, now that it hit your ears, now you got to bring it back home and tell them, hey, there was a recommendation, and that guy that always be pushing stuff, he made us come back and tell y'all. That's what the boss is. And I'm just saying, but really, no, I really do. I think in conversations we have on the air, what comes in is stuff that, even if it's not active right now, is saying, hey, an issue's rising, let's prepare. Let's monitor it.
Bringing awareness.
Yeah. I know we run out of time, but you got it, bro.
I think we have one more
Oh,
call.
I'm sorry, caller. Caller, you on the air. You should say, hey, I'm here. Go ahead, caller.
Caller, you should be on the air.
Good morning. How is everybody doing today?
Marvelous. How you doing?
Fabulous as always.
All right.
Well, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the probate court in the States. And this is what it is. My mother passed away last October.
Sorry for that.
4 of us, but my oldest brother, he got killed in a trucking accident, so it's just us 3. So my youngest brother, it was like sell a house and split it 3 different ways. So the brother behind me, he don't know. I got my own house. He told my youngest brother, you live in Texas. I live in Colorado with my house. She lives in Buffalo, New York. Let's give her a house. Okay, fine. Now, my brother behind me, he signed over that he didn't want nothing to do with the house and I can get everything. And this was about 5 months ago. So now, my youngest brother, he always did things his way. So when I talked with the probate lawyer, she typed up some paperwork, and it said he has to come from Houston, Texas, to Buffalo, New York, October the 18th, to tell me, yes, what you call the wrong part of the house or no. But the good part about it, though, I know my brother's not going to come all the way from Texas to say yes or no. So if he don't show up, they said automatically everything, go towards me. So this must be something new that's going on, right now. And they was telling me earlier and stuff like that. If 2 of them, want the house, it had to be split 3 different ways. But since me and my brother and stuff, we on the same page. They're going to give me the house. And the youngest one, he made a mistake. He texted me, oh, yes, you can have the house. Yes, you can have the house. This going on way back to April this year. So as far as I'm concerned, not concerned, but they said if he don't show up October the 18th in court, okay, not a lawyer, he has to have be his own. I get the house automatically. And the reason I wanted to chime in on that, though, because maybe that's something changed when a lady was talking about what happened in 2014. And just for the record, please, if your parents and stuff like that have a house, so please write up the will, because it's much easier that way than, going through court and the paperwork and stuff. That's all I wanted to say. And your show is excellent. Everybody on there is doing good work, and keep it up, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, y'all have a blessed day.
You too now. Thanks for sharing.
When I'm listening to that caller, that's kind of where I'm getting to. We can talk about local elections, home, we can talk about WUFO all you want, but this is information that needs to be brought to the people. It needs to be learned by the people. We cannot blame politicians for not writing a will. We can't. And I'm only 19. I'm talking to my friends who are telling me, oh yeah, my parents rent for $1,000. You might need to look at a mortgage. I'm like, I live at home. Why am I saying this? Why? Because I'm serious and saying I can't wait for a politician or an organization to save me out of my situation. If you are renting and you want to buy, get serious about buying, because like she said, the auctions aren't random. These aren't new. They haven't started buying and flipping housings new. Landlording is not a new concept brought around. And so if we sit here and talk about the issues, start educating someone. If you got to be the squeaky wheel at every family barbecue saying we need to stop renting, we need to start buying, we need to start renting, and we need to start buying, where's your money going around this time of the year so we can all come together and buy a house? If you need to be that person, be that person. But what I can't continue to hear is just, it's a election. No, if they can win at the game, so can you. Right. What is the issue? Right. The issue is they're approaching it strategically. So what I just feel when it comes to housing in general, we talk about renting versus buying. As easy as it is to talk about landlord discrimination and other things, if you don't like it, stop renting. And get serious about buying. And it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, it's a stretch. I know it's probably not the easiest thing in the world. I'm trying to move out, and I understand how difficult it is. But that being said, I'm not going to sell myself short or not learn about these policies, because like Steve said, it'll come to bite you. And now it's not that boring. Now it's really bad. Now I don't even want to hear this. Now it's not, now I'm avoiding or nervous going into offices or looking at paperwork. And so when times like this come around, when auctions come around, when things like that come around, if you're tired of people coming from out of town and raising rent, buy a house. Buy a house. That's how you fight back. That's how you fight back, is buy a house.
To piggyback off of that, we had to become, and my husband and I, we had to be the squeaky wheel with our friends because we had 3 kids. But I think it was 2 years ago, we were just in an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, 2 kids, and we had one on the way. And we're like, okay, we can rent a bigger apartment or we can start the process of getting a house. And my husband, he's 32, but mentally he's like 76. But that stuff excites him. He likes to have those uncomfortable conversations about finances because he's all about that generational wealth. So we had to get uncomfortable so that fast forward now, 2 years later, we can be comfortable. You know, we were able to purchase a house. We're in a 3-bedroom house now. We're in Buffalo, but we had to go through that uncomfortable process to get to where we are today. So we're looking at the house we're at now. We're like, okay, let's get a will. Let's make sure if something, God forbid, happens to us, it stays in our family so we don't unfortunately run into those circumstances that the callers are talking about. But I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. You have to be that squeaky will because otherwise you'll be complaining and paying rent that's more than a mortgage. My mortgage is under $1,000. You know what I'm saying? And I'm complaining, and I have friends that's like, my mortgage is $1,000 or $1,500, and we're like, hey, did you think about possibly purchasing in a house? Not saying it'll be better, but stop complaining and actually do the work. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Right, it's uncomfortable. It's difficult to have those conversations.
Yeah,
we
it
don't want
is.
to, but this is when you talk about even organizations like H.O.M.E. H.O.M.E. is focused on getting people into the best housing equitably they can.
Yes.
And if you are able to be at the table, don't sell your spot short and not be there just because you don't want to or it's difficult.
Right.
And that's all I think it really boils down to when we talk about the buying versus renting, raising house rates, houses going back to the government, all these things, all these issues that we're struggling with. We just need to be more at the table. I know we're coming short on time, so I want to just read
Yeah,
that.
it should be at the table, and it should start with learning how to save.
Yeah.
And you can do that. You can get to the house through renting. You know, it ain't like a whole lot of us that exist can jump right in and say, I got the house. You start saving to have what you need to get a house.
Yeah.
And that speaks to something else. When it comes to renting, the same process. How you gonna plan to rent a place and only have in your mind, know you got rent for 2 months, but you want to rent somewhere? Before you get to the second month, you coming up with how you gonna not be able to pay the rent on time for the 3rd month. I mean, look, I know everybody needs somewhere to live. Housing is a right. But I want you to understand there's some duties that we as individuals have when we're going to decide and get what we need. You can't go in the store and just take it. You gotta buy it, you gotta pay for it. And so if you want a good apartment, you got to make sure you're prepared to do your part. Not only taking care of it, but paying what you rent it for. Don't go rent over your head.
Yeah.
And if you learn the same, you hear all that housing talk we're talking about, that could be you. You heard us talking about the auction, that could be you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to just rent, but while you are renting, you better stay in touch with H.O.M.E. By the way, you better give your address or number or something so people can know who to call and what to contact. And y'all having a party when?
October 27th from 5:30 to 9:30 at the atrium at Riches.
And if people need to get in contact with us, they can call us at 716-854-1400. They can go to our website at homeny.org, or they can visit our office at 1542 Main Street.
Hey, bro, we out of here?
I think we're all out. I'm gonna recap real quick. Got the 60th annual gala. Be careful about them application fees. $20. Background reports are reusable and FIFA reusable. And make sure if your landlord is playing, get them to that landlord training by H.O.M.E. I just want to say, if you are really frustrated with the community and you truly say, I want to keep wealth in my community's pockets, I'm tired of people coming out of town and buying up all these houses, and buy a house. And if you can't buy a house, like Jim said, talk to H.O.M.E. Thank you guys. And we'll be back next week. Be safe.